Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. Coming at you with another episode. This one is episode 233. Show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/233. And for this episode, we're going to be continuing with our true crime little bent for the last couple of episodes here. In the last episode, we had a pretty heavy subject. That was the Franklin cover-up with continuing guest, Hunter Durensis, returning guest. He's also my editor over at the Libertarian Institute. Great guy, makes my pieces way better every single time. Really like Hunter and was glad to have him on the show last week. This week, we're going to be talking about the public defender crisis in the United States. And this is a real problem that is bordering on a constitutional crisis. And we're going to be focusing on it within the state that I practice professionally. Of course, my law practice is in Wisconsin, and the crisis centered around Wisconsin with a federal lawsuit being filed. Let's see, this was an old piece here. This is really an ongoing problem that's been happening for decades in Wisconsin, but it's emblematic of a larger problem that actually plagues the United States that I think is going to come to a head in the future here. So the big problem is that there are too few public defenders that are taking public defender cases. And you can see this article here happened in 2019. And this is just in Wisconsin, mind you. But again, we have another piece here from the ACLU talking about how there's a chronic lack of public defenders in the United States. And this is a big problem when you have things like the war on drugs that criminalizes a whole broad swath of behaviors. And I mean, what happens when you criminalize more behavior? Well, you have more criminals. And from a libertarian point of view, it's been a long time since I've talked about the basics of libertarian theory, but of course we know the non-aggression principles saying that you have a right to your life and you have a right to your property, and that no one can use violence to aggress against you by, hurting you or taking your things without your consent. It's really a consent-based legal philosophy. And when you have a lot of behavior that is not criminal by definition, like I said, you're going to be getting a lot of excess lawsuits, excess litigation, and excess criminality. So you have a system with prosecutors and I can just say from my actual experience in the law, you have prosecutors who file charges, and functionally pretty much every single case that they file is going to result in some kind of conviction. And from in a way, I have a little bit of misgivings about it as someone who is a voluntarist at heart. I don't think that these behaviors should be criminalized. Possession of drug paraphernalia, possession of THC, a lot of it is a party to a crime. So if you're in a car where somebody in the car has marijuana and is possessing it knowingly, the DAs will just charge possession of marijuana as a party to a crime. So it's like aiding and abetting, where, they could probably sell a case in front of a jury saying, well, you were in a car with someone that had marijuana. You probably knew about it. So therefore, a jury would probably find you guilty of the fact you were in a car with someone who had weed and you didn't know about it. You couldn't smell it. And then it's like the onus is on you to prove that you didn't know that the person in the car with you had marijuana. So functionally speaking, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who have had experiences with the law. Maybe, you were 19 years old and you were carrying some marijuana, or I don't know, maybe you had an OWI, or maybe you were caught stealing something. Or allegedly stealing something, and you were put in a situation where it seemed like you wouldn't be able to win a trial, or maybe you just didn't want to spend all the time, money, energy, stress, and effort to take everything to a trial and to essentially prove your innocence, which functionally it seems like that's, on paper, of course, it's that you're innocent until proven guilty. But I've found that the the criminal process is so difficult and arduous and expensive that it really just functionally is, well, let me just plead to something. Maybe you probably are guilty of it, but of course, there's a process that has to be gone through in order to prove your guilt. And there's certain, of course, legal defenses that you could go through in order to at least fight the system. And the interesting thing about it is that it's a lot like voting. A lot like voting, where all these people say, well, we have to pick the lesser of two evils, or it's a wasted vote or something like that. And a lot of people are afraid that if they don't vote, then their guy or the lesser of two evils is going to win. So I have to vote. And this just in perpetuity guarantees that the system is going to go further and further, because everyone is afraid that if they boycott the system, then their better choice or their better choice won't win. And it's a lot like paying taxes, right? A lot of people pay taxes because everyone else is going to pay their taxes. And if they don't pay their taxes, well, then the IRS or, the county is going to file a tax lien against their house and force the sale or something like that, or have a sheriff's sale of their property because they didn't pay their taxes. And it's that fear of being the only one that will do a thing that keeps the entire system from revolting. On the flip side of that, the legal system is a lot of the same. I mean, the prosecutor's office, the DA's office, relies on the fact or on the hope or the bet or the reality that all of the criminal defendants won't make them prove their case, right? And in a lot of ways, it's like, okay, well, I've people right now who are facing possession charges or who are facing a disorderly conduct or something like that. And that's a whole nother conversation about disorderly conduct. But people right now who are facing charges like this, and it's like, well, you look at the dash cam footage or you go through and you read the complaint, and it's like, well, there was a valid reason for the stop. And we could do like a suppression motion or something. But you're probably going to lose. And that's the reality of being a criminal defense lawyer. Is like, you're probably going to lose any motion you bring or any case you bring to trial. That's just the way it is, because it's like, these people, most of your clients did the crime. That doesn't mean that they should be found guilty according to the law, or that it's right that that's what a crime is. But when you have a situation that's pretty straightforward, it's like, well, there was a valid reason for the stop, and you had a bull sitting in plain sight, and the police officer came up to your car. It was a valid stop. You were going 15 miles over the speed limit, and the radar gun worked and all this kind of stuff. Or I'm just thinking of different scenarios, or, you weren't displaying a license plate on the vehicle, and the police pulled you over, and he walked up to the car and asked for your license and registration, which he's allowed to do. And then he saw, a piece sitting there on the glove box, or you had an open container, and then he ran your license and found out that you were, driving on a suspended license, so he could take you into custody. And when he took you into custody, he found your methamphetamines on you, or something like that. That's a fact pattern that you really see very often. So to go back to my original point, it's like, when you do all this as someone who doesn't believe in the justness of much of the laws, much of the charges that my clients are facing, you really do have some moral misgivings about representing them in a system where you are going to, the easiest and best resolution for their case is for them to take a plea deal or something like that. And it really does hurt, because it's like, well, these things are things that shouldn't be criminalized, right? And in a way, what you're really doing is you're allowing the system to function, or it can feel like aiding and abetting the prosecution in their pursuit of unjust crimes. But this is part of a larger conversation that's happening in the liberty movement right now, where there's this huge push to stop living in Ancapistan in your head. And generally speaking, I do agree with that. In 2019, before the pandemic, and before I took my hiatus from Liberty Weekly and from podcasting and from the Libertarian Institute, I put out a series of podcasts on, I called it Liberty Bigly. It was a B-side series of podcasts. It was a whole different podcast feed that I put out on anchor.fm because it was free and I could literally just record my thoughts on my phone. So I would do these bonus podcasts all the time, and I would just kind of do what I'm doing now, like a stream of consciousness episode, just kind of like a verbal diary or something like that. And it would help me kind of work through my thoughts about something, or it'd be like a verbal journal. And I had a series of podcasts where I voiced a lot of the thoughts that I think some of the post-libertarian moment was about back in 2019. And so I guess this is my way of claiming, like, yeah, I had these thoughts before everyone else did, before Pete Quinones or some of these other post-libertarian types came out with their thoughts. I was already there in 2019. It didn't take COVID for this to hit me, but all in good fun. I'm not trying to start anything. I'm just making some jokes. So at that point, I had these thoughts. And I think one thing that made me realize it is because, I had started my podcast when I was in law school, and I started it for very idealistic reasons, but also very practical reasons. And that was to have an outlet where I could talk about libertarian theory and all of the reading that I was doing instead of doing my law studying, all of the Rothbard I was reading, and Bruno Leone, a really good libertarian legal scholar, and I'm trying to think of the other, Bruce L. Benson, his books about the law. And there really wasn't a lot of lawyers out there who were doing what I was doing at the time, which was doing a libertarian podcast about legal theory. I mean, you had Stephan Kinsella, who I consider, and I did consider at the time, although there's some things I like foreign policy, and I didn't agree with his COVID positions, but I think he's a genius. I mean, I think he's one of the smartest living libertarians that we have. Next to Hans Hermann Hoppe, and no one can deny the amount of the contributions that Stephan Kinsella has made to libertarian theory. And he was doing his stuff, but he wasn't doing it super often. And of course, I had Kinsella on my show, and I do, of course, I greatly respect Kinsella and his opinions and his contributions. Although, like I said, I don't agree with him on everything, but so at the time I wanted to start something where I could talk about, coming into this scene and the complete mind fuck that you have when you change your worldview and read all this stuff. And I was into, I still am into James Corbett, but I went down the conspiracy rabbit hole, maybe a little bit too much. And I had this whole journey. And by the time 2019 came around, it was at its end. At least that chapter of it was at its end. And at the time I was in a big law firm doing big law stuff, which just, for people who aren't attorneys, it's, the corporate law, more of a corporate law environment where you're really kind of chained to your desk and you live, eat, breathe, sleep your career. And I had a child, and this was just way too much. And I was spending all my time and focusing on the podcast by the time 2019 came around. And I remember along the way, every step that I would take in my career, I would have people come forward criticizing me for being an attorney and engaging with the law and trying to do practical things to create liberty. And of course, in a way, creating liberty means that you have to interact with the system, and that technically by being an attorney, you are an agent of the court. And wow, I apologize. I didn't think that this episode would take this turn. I am going to get to the public defender crisis, but this is all relevant. Just hang in there. So I would get to the point where I would be advancing in the system, and I would have, like when I got my bar license, when I actually passed the bar exam, and I did a series of podcasts about how stressed out I was about the bar and and all that kind of stuff. And you can go back in the archives. It's like around episode 88, libertyweekly.net/88. And you can, see how stressed I was about it. And I would get people who would write to me saying like, you fucking traitor, like you are just, you're one of them, and lawyers are snakes and all this kind of stuff, which, I mean, of course, if you've had a bad experience with the legal system, like many people have, you hate your lawyer, or you hate all lawyers, because, I mean, to be fair, there's a contingent of lawyers that's not, it's not extremely tiny, but there is a contingent of lawyers. I'm not saying the contingent is tiny. I'm saying it's not tiny. So I wouldn't say it's a majority, but it's a large segment of attorneys who are not super great people, or who are just in it for themselves, or, and there's image with the, in the profession, we try to create an image collectively that is not the stereotype, right? Because for every bad lawyer out there, there's a lot of really good lawyers who really do care about their clients, and they really do care about just outcomes. That's why we get in this profession, right? But a few bad actors, I don't mean to sound like a cop or something like, oh yeah, all cops are good. It's just the little segment that are bad that give the rest of us a bad name. No, I mean, there are things about lawyers that are definitely unsavory, but what do we do about that, right? Do I just throw up my hands and say, well, shit, I guess, the legal profession is all corrupt. They're all crooks. They're all aiding a corrupt system and letting it go further. No, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to throw up my arms and say, well, this whole criminal justice system is fucked, so therefore I'm not going to participate in it. It's all immoral. They're all a bunch of bastards. No, I'm going to go into the system and be the best goddamn lawyer that I can be, and help create the best outcomes for the largest amount of people that I can, right? If I throw up my hands and say, you know what, I'm too pure to be an attorney and to interact in this system, well, all those people that I could have represented and could have given a better experience, or could have gotten more justice for, or could have gotten a better result for in the system that does exist today and will exist in the future, that is unjust, that does put people away for victimless crimes. All those people that I could have helped won't be helped now, or at least they wouldn't get the quality of representation that I could have and would have provided them. And now, I mean, as a voluntarist, you guys out there, I've been saying this for a long time, that the court system is interesting. It's like a gorilla. If you might not want to dance with the gorilla, but if the gorilla grabs you, you're going to fucking dance with the gorilla. That's just the way it is. That's what's going to happen. And if you have to dance with the gorilla, if the gorilla gets its hooks into you and is twirling you around, wouldn't you rather have someone helping you through that process that is also of your same like mind, or would you like all the pure libertarians to be, too good to participate in the system so that they can't help you in a situation where you really do need it? Now, of course, you don't have to have an extremely principled, voluntarist, libertarian attorney to have the best outcome for your case or to have the best representation. In fact, I would say that there's incredible civil libertarian. I mean, they wouldn't even identify as libertarians, but there's great attorneys out there who believe in justice, and they believe in advocating for criminals, for the disadvantaged, and they believe in due process, and they do believe in that system. And I think on this podcast in the past, when I've talked about I had an episode called No Hope for COVID Freedom in the Courts, or something like that. And I went through some of the opinions that were coming out about mask mandates. And, we've seen kind of a little bit of new life being breathed into the courts, I think, with more conservative jurists. And I think that since the height of the pandemic and the height of hysteria and the height of doomerism over it, we actually have seen the courts in a way do their job. And I'm not saying it's perfect, or I'm not saying that, it's a principled stance. But at least in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ended the lockdowns. And So we do have some successes, and we do have, in a way, we should be having our faith restored in at least that part, the safeguards that were put forward by the founding fathers, a little bit. It's not all horrible, terrible stuff, because there are some people who are patriots, who are in the system, who do believe in principles and do believe in freedom and liberty. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass or being some starry-eyed idealist about it or naive about the realities of the system, because we've seen horror and terror and unjust. We've seen the extent that people are willing to follow along with the regime when a crisis happens. And of course, I'm not naive to the marching, all the World Economic Forum and the stuff that people are really trying to call out and point a finger at. I'm not naive about that. I've been talking about that on my show, but we did see a little bit of that, and where this weaves into what's happening right now in Wisconsin with public defenders, right? And of course, I guess that whole intro was to say, the whole first 22 minutes of this show was to say that this is from a libertarian point of view in the larger conversation about being influential and being the pure libertarian, right? Because this is a conversation that takes many forms, but is happening over many different issues between many groups of different people in the liberty space in the last couple of years. And I'm not coming to this episode with any kind of answer, except I guess saying what my experience has been and what it is and what it might be in the future. But to fall down within a certain spectrum on this whole question that I think is a continuum, right? I fall more on the practical side than I have in the past. I think that the progression of this show, if you're someone who's listened since May 30th, what is Memorial Day 2017, if you've listened since this show dropped, you've probably seen me start as being a very principled, idealistic libertarian, and I'd like to think that through the years you've seen me progress in my thoughts, from being that principled, pure libertarian to learning things about the world and making some kind of concessions or evolution of my thoughts about when we can be practical while still holding those principles. And I think it's an interesting interplay to have. But what some things that I have found is in the anti-war stance too, is being someone who's incredibly principled and trying to be anti-war in every sense, in some ways taking how I used to feel about the non-aggression principle and being the purest of the pure libertarian and applying that to being anti-war, which I still think is right. And which I still think is, of course, trying to figure out where you fit into this whole liberty movement or with your activism and apply yourself there or apply your efforts there. And of course, I think, like I said, there's been a lot of foreign policy coverage on this show for the past year and a half, maybe. And I think it's really, I found that was an area that wasn't, because all the NAP stuff gets boring after a while in the theoretical discussions, but there's something about being anti-war that is more important because, of course, war and peace, I believe, is the most important issue for stopping the state. If we're going to limit or stop the state, we need to stop the worst things first that the state does, which is kill people overseas, at home, but also overseas. And because the empire, the war making is the worst part about the domestic state too, because one necessitates the other. And there's mission creep and the self-licking ice cream cone and all that kind of stuff, not to mention the weapons funneling back to the United States domestically. And so at this point in my career too, there's an interesting inflection point, because it's like, well, with your messaging, of course, you want to maintain those principles, but how do you work in having the best anti-war take or the best libertarian take? How do you communicate it in a way that will be the most effective, and B, also maintain those principles that are so important? And of course, the parallel between the application of applying libertarian principles to being an attorney who is actively participating in the justice system. Oops. Geez, that was scary. Participating in for those of you listening, my sign fell over. Participating in the justice system, but also knowing that any participating is in a way maybe aiding violations of the non-aggression principle, because you are allowing, in a sense, allowing the DAs, and maybe this isn't right even, maybe this isn't as clear-cut as I'm portraying it to be, but maybe there's a case that by participating in the justice system, you are aiding in state activity that is unjust. But it's also the argument of like, well, do you benefit in a way, like if there's some kind of welfare, or if there's like, say, state-sponsored health insurance, or Ayn Rand living in public housing or rent-adjusted housing in New York City or something like that. There's no way to be an incredibly pure libertarian. But in the same way that there's also that interplay with being a non-interventionist, right? Because, of course, there are regimes out there who do violate human rights, and there's an interplay between being the best libertarian or the best anti-war activist trying to deal with these conflicts where there's rights violations on both sides, and nothing is going to be incredibly pure, because war is a complicated thing with all these different actors and motivations, war crimes on both sides. But then again, being an American citizen and talking about wars that your regime is aiding and is directly complicit in, and in many cases wouldn't happen unless your state's involvement. And I think that I'm learning right now. I'm in a phase of learning where I'm changing the way that I think about things, or at least considering other ways to think about things, especially with the messaging of the show, and trying to be a person who is the most influential that I can be. And sometimes that means being persuasive instead of being aggressive. And there's a place for both. And I'd like to think that I'm humble enough to admit that I don't exactly know what that is. And I think that one thing in my career has been that I figured out that I don't exactly, of course you don't always know how to do something until you do it, or you find out that you were doing something wrong and you make mistakes, and you have to learn from those mistakes and then better yourself and speak with people. Especially in my legal career, I have mentors that especially as I've started my own practice, I have mentors, are people who are, similar to me, but also a little further along than me, that I can call up and say, hey, I wanted to bounce this past you. I was looking at the law, and I'm looking at this case law. I have a client where this is happening, and I just want to get your opinion on it. I think this, but given all these facts, it might be different, right? Can you tell me, have you had this before? Or I had this conversation with my client and it really didn't go well. Have you had this before? And what is the best way that I can do the same conversation except not have them get pissed off at me? Those are a few examples. So in the liberty world is no different, and so you go through these situations, you try and just figure out what the best way to say things are, or to be with the goal in mind of being, I think for me, what's important to me is to be genuine, to be honest, to call out things when I see them, but to do it diplomatically in a way that's not going to cause infighting or hatred or some kind of split or something like that. And of course, there have been, if you're someone on Twitter who follows me, there have been people that I've gotten into spats with, because I'm not perfect. I'm a human, and And so those kind of things happen. And it's not to say you can never do that either. But it's just something to be aware of and to think about as we navigate life and as we navigate through our activism or advocate or navigate through the movement or even navigate through the final days of humanity, right? Because, I could be talking about the nuclear escalation with Russia right now that's going on in these referendums that are happening in Donetsk and Luhansk and the Zaporizhia, and I think Kherson is the other area in southeastern Ukraine there. But that's scary enough, and a lot of people are talking about it. And I've been working on a few pieces behind the scenes that are not on that subject. So, and some of them are about Taiwan as well. But I know that there's been a lot of foreign policy coverage on the podcast as of late, and that's not always what I wanted, what the show is, and it's a lot of what the show has become. And of course, that is going to be a major focus of the show from like it has been in the last little bit. But I also have these other things I want to cover, like the Franklin cover up, and not that exactly, but things that are in that vein too. Hey everybody, welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. It is at my new membership website, libertyweekly.club. And I know I've been announcing this, but I left Substack, rolled out a new membership website that operates the same way. You get content through your email address, but there's also a web page, libertyweekly.club, where you can go and read the articles. And it works really great so far. Just a couple of hiccups in terms of trying to figure out how to use, free previews for people who are just signed up to the free newsletter. And for people who sign up through the membership here, you can see that right now I have a $5 a month tier that will get you access to early access to episodes of Liberty Weekly, access to bonus episodes that I've been trying to come out with 2 times a month. Preprint access to all my Libertarian Institute articles before they're published. And I'm working on setting up a subscribers only live stream. I'd like to do that before the end of the month, which I will announce through the email list. So if you go through, sign up for the email list, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button. You can choose the free tier or you could choose the $5 per month tier, which will get you access to the benefits. But for free content, there still is free content up there. Like I do a lot of article content there. So head on over to libertyweekly.club. The other thing that I'm really excited to announce is a collaboration between myself and Ludwig von Mises Pieces, which is the guy who does all my graphics and thumbnails, and the guy who, he does a ton of awesome work. So you can see Liberty Weekly merch is now available if you head on over to libertyweekly.net this time /merch, MERCH. You'll be able to find Liberty Weekly merch with my new logo with the rising sun and Lady Liberty holding the shield and flag. I really like the logo that he was able to do for me. And you can see that you can get coffee mugs there. You can get sweatshirt. You can get t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. The other collaboration. Oh, and if you use promo code LW10, that will get you 10% off. And it will also get a kickback to me and show him that you bought through my link. But you could also go through all the other merchandise that he has there. There's lots of good stuff. You buy anything in the store with promo code LW10, and I will also get a kickback. You can see a bunch of stickers and t-shirts and designs that people in our sphere of the Liberty movement will just love all that, the merch that he has there. It's original stuff that he's made himself. And we did a collaboration on a t-shirt, that idea that I had, Dissolve NATO, super timely right now. But for those of you just listening to the audio version only, it's the NATO logo that is being shattered into a million pieces, and it says Dissolve NATO on it. So I think it's a really cool, timely t-shirt. Of course, it was an idea that I'd commissioned, and I think that he did an awesome job with it. And if you like my thumbnails and logo art, Ludwig von Mises Pieces did Why I Am Anti-War podcast logo, which is a dove coming out of a helmet. And I really, really like that logo too. So check out this Dissolve NATO. You can get it in sticker format. You can get it on a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. And I'm going to be picking some of these up myself because I think they turned out really awesome. So again, head on over to libertyweekly.net/merch. And to get the NATO t-shirt, head on over to libertyweekly.net/NATO, NATO. All right. So that's all the stuff I got for you guys this week. Thanks everyone for subscribing, all the members at libertyweekly.club. Really appreciate it. You really help me afford all the hosting costs and to upgrade my equipment and all that kind of stuff too. So, all right. Thanks. Peace. But anyways, moving back to the whole public defender thing, I guess this whole issue has really kind of been something where you really see a dilemma in the libertarian lexicon, right? Because you have the state is doing something, right? The state is unjustly pursuing convictions where they've made victimless crimes crimes. So they're using taxpayer dollars to create an entire police state around these victimless crimes and other crimes, but volume-wise, these victimless crimes, they are charging people with those crimes, and then if those people are indigent, they are stealing more taxpayer funds, and they are using those taxpayer funds to pay for the defense of the person that they're charging with the victimless crime. So throughout this whole process, it's the public who's being victimized twice, in a way. Because maybe 3 times, right? Because taxpayer money that's being robbed is being robbed to fund a police state that is then criminalizing victimless crimes. So the police state is it's not just aimed at the criminals, it's aimed at all the suspects, and it's aimed at the public at large in other ways. And then they victimize individual people by charging them with these victimless crimes. They put them in jail at taxpayer expense. Then they appoint a defense for that person at taxpayer expense. And of course, you'd be dealing with the problem of indigent defendants in any legal system that you have, right? You're going to have people who are charged with crimes who can't present a defense for themselves. I mean, of course, in a libertarian legal system, you would think that it would be private rights rights defending institutions that would arbitrate between them with, David D. Friedman has talked about this. You would have rights institutions that would have arbitration agreements between themselves, where you would probably pay a subscription service to be a member of a certain arbitration firm or a rights protection agency. And if they had disputes with each other, they would settle it through this pre-established probably series of common law systems where probably even the arbitrators and judges would be their own individual contractors that could be hired to apply a certain set of case law or a certain type of law to arbitrate these disputes. You would probably have these rights protection agencies that would generally subscribe to competing systems of law, or maybe just one would kind of come out ahead or in front because it just proved itself to be way better, right? Now, I haven't talked about this or read about it for maybe more than a year, so if you'll forgive me if I'm not getting it 100% correct, but that's the general idea, right? Even in that system, you're going to have people who are indigent and can't afford a lawyer, or who haven't paid the subscription fee to a certain arbitration service, right? So this is a problem that I think any legal system is going to have to confront. But the way that the state is doing it is pretty goddamn bad, right? Because what they do is they have a police state. They enforce all these victimless crimes. They don't enforce it uniformly, in effect. And then they have right? A system where they can't appoint lawyers to represent these people because the money and the funding is not there. It's been sent to Ukraine, or I guess federally speaking, but on a state level, it's been sent for all of these entitlement programs at the state level, or all these, wasted funding missions, or maybe it's been spent because some prisoner was abused in a county jail somewhere, and there's a settlement, and I think it's the county that would pay for this, but the settlement has been in the, a couple $1,000,000 or something like that. I mean, pick your wasted government program, right? Well, that's where the money went, instead of going to defend these indigent people who are being charged with victimless crimes and crimes with victims, to be fair. But this is a national problem, and this is a constitutional crisis, or it's getting to that level at least, right? So here's news and commentary from the ACLU, which, of course, the ACLU was not very good during COVID, kind of came out in favor of COVID overreach in a way. And I had Eric Garris on the show, the one of the co-founders of antiwar.com, with Justin Raimondo, and he was saying that it was the ACLU that worked with him to defend anti-war and Justin Raimondo in the FBI versus, I think first it was FBI versus Raimondo, and then it was FBI versus Garris, and they did a great job. And he was talking about how they defended him, antiwar.com, in that case, or at least they worked with a firm that took ACLU cases. But here, this is March 8th, 2022. So this is this year. If you care about freedom, you should be asking why we don't fund our public defender systems. 4 out of 5 criminal defendants can't afford a lawyer, but in many places, the system promised to them by our state and federal constitutions is chronically in crisis, right? And that's very important, is that this crisis has been going on for decades in some cases. In Wisconsin, the way the system works is that there is a public defender division they're all state employees, right? Sets up this public defender system. They have offices across the state. There's staff attorneys who are state employees who all they do is public defender work. What happens when a public defender's office in the Tri-County area, because there's only one in the Tri-County area in upstate Wisconsin, what happens when the office itself conflicts out of a case, right? The office cannot represent one co-defendant because there's 2 co-defendants and the office can only represent one of them. Maybe there's another office, and I don't know exactly how their conflict rules work, but in the case where there's a conflict of interest, the public defender's office has to farm out the other case where there's a conflict to a private bar attorney, such as myself, because I take these cases, where they will contract a private attorney to represent the public defender client. And the rate of pay is so terrible compared to what someone like me could get for a private client that a lot of attorneys do not take private pay public defender work. I know that's kind of a mouthful, because in many cases, now I'm not going to say exact numbers, but in many cases, private pay is more than double what the public defender's office would pay. I'll just say that. And moreover, there's a lot of travel that's involved with these public defender cases, and the travel rate, the hourly rate for travel is even less than half, maybe an eighth of what you would make in a private case with a private client. So therefore, private attorneys do not take public defender cases because they make way more money not doing that and doing just private pay. And it's an issue, of course, because you have your right to a speedy trial that is being deprived of these people who are sitting in jail for months waiting for an attorney to represent them. So some of these This should be short enough to read here. In Montana, an all too familiar constitutional crisis is underway. Pretrial defendants who cannot afford a lawyer are languishing behind bars, awaiting the legal representation they are entitled to because public defenders face untenable caseloads. Oh, so that's another thing, untenable caseloads. It's not just that they're conflicting out of cases, it's also that public defenders are overworked too. In response, Rhonda Lindquist, who leads the Office of the State Public Defender, was held in contempt of court and fined $8,500 by a county district judge. Lindquist's overburdened and understaffed office was declining too many cases, the judge found, denying indigent defendants facing criminal charges their constitutional right to legal representation. Lindquist's offense is not one of negligence. She has tried to secure additional funding to hire more lawyers so that every indigent defendant's right to counsel is protected. So far, lawmakers have been utterly unresponsive. Both the judge and the state public defender face an impossible situation. The public defender is ethically obligated to decline new cases if taking those cases would make it impossible for her lawyers to adequately represent their existing clients. So it's a catch-22, right? You're caught between ethical obligations. Either you're going to be held in contempt of court, or you violate your ethics according to the Office of Lawyer Regulation. Which one is worse than the other, right? Do you want to be disbarred, or do you want to be held in contempt? That's probably not disbarred for that. I mean, you'd be sanctioned or something by OLR, but. So at the same time, the judge is trying to uphold his oath of office and ensure that indigent defendants are not denied their constitutional right to counsel and railroaded through the system without representation. The state public defender and the judge cannot solve this crisis by battling with each other. The governor and lawmakers need to step in and ensure that Montana's public defense system is constitutional. While the clash between a judge and a state public defender in Montana may be an outlier, it speaks to the broader crisis of public defense. Two reports released in January highlight the severe shortage of public defenders in Oregon and New Mexico, which are short roughly 1,300 and 600 public defenders respectively. In both states, caseloads are significantly higher than the current systems can constitutionally support. Oregon is overloaded by more than 65,000 cases per year. New Mexico by more than 40,000 cases per year. But this crisis reaches far beyond 3 states. The ACLU's docket reflects that public defense systems across the country have long failed to ensure the integrity of state and local convictions and the constitutional rights of people accused of crimes. Last week, the ACLU of Maine filed a case challenging the public defense system in Maine. We are also years into litigation in Missouri and Idaho, and between our national and affiliate offices, we have previously litigated these cases in Nevada, California, South Carolina, Washington, Montana, Utah, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Louisiana. To be clear, public defenders are not the problem. At their best, they are the champion of our rights, people who strive to be David when Goliath shows up. The problem is that states refuse to adequately support and properly structure this critical function. Indeed, the overwhelming majority of criminal cases in this country proceed against people who cannot afford to hire their own attorney. Roughly 4 out of 5 criminal defendants do not have the means to hire a lawyer and rely on public defenders or court-appointed lawyers. So there's also a system whereby if you are indigent to the point where there's 2 tiers, right? So if you're below this tier, the lower tier, you qualify for a state public defender. But if you're between being indigent, but you can't afford a private lawyer, which would be a second tier, you may qualify for an attorney appointed by the court itself that the court and the county contracts with to represent you at a reduced rate. So you would still have to pay that attorney back. It's just at a reduced rate, and you don't have to pay up front. I know it can get confusing, but so you have your state public defender cases, which are below my right hand here. That's the indigent, very, poor enough to qualify. But if you are, above that level, but you can't afford a private pay lawyer, you can qualify for a court appointed lawyer at a reduced cost, which is usually, I don't know, the hourly rate is $30 an hour higher than the public defender would pay a private attorney. So it's a little bit different, but so without adequate public defense, most people in the criminal legal system face the full force of government power with nothing more than illusory rights. The constitutional rights we owe to someone before they are incarcerated simply cannot be vindicated in 5 minutes. Yet that is all defendants in a given courtroom may get with their public defender before their liberty is taken away, if they're lucky. Man. Well, my clients are a lot more lucky than that because I spend a lot of time with my clients. So if you think that this doesn't affect you, your loved ones, or your friends, consider that an estimated 1 in 3 Americans will be arrested by the age of 23. That is insane. I mean, that is insane. So there's a bunch more to this. And it's not just the ACLU. So the ACLU lists off a string of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 states where they're pursuing this kind of litigation. Well, the ACLU is not the only, it's not the only civil rights organization that are doing these lawsuits. So it's not an accurate cross-section of the number of states that are in crisis like this. And this is a constitutional crisis. I mean, the system will collapse if you cannot represent indigent clients. The workload is overwhelmed. And I had a talking point that I trailed off on earlier in the episode where I was talking about how a lot of ways, if everyone pays their taxes because they think that their neighbor won't, or excuse me, everyone is afraid of not paying their taxes because they think they'd be the only one to not pay their taxes. Everyone wants to vote because they're afraid that, if everyone else will vote no matter what, so I better vote. Everyone going through this system is afraid to enforce their rights by challenging things at court hearings because if everyone decided to demand, a preliminary hearing, a lot of preliminary hearings are waived in felony cases. But if everyone just took a plea deal, these plea deals allow the system to keep going. If everyone demanded a jury trial, the system would collapse overnight. That's just the way it is. Now, do you want to be in a situation where, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, there isn't really a triable case? That doesn't mean you don't do it, but there's a case that you don't really want to you don't want to risk losing. So do you want to take that to trial? I don't know, probably not. But again, if everyone demanded their right to a jury trial, the system would collapse overnight. Let's talk more specifically about Wisconsin, because there was a federal lawsuit, there was a state lawsuit that was filed just in August of this year in Wisconsin, alleging a lot of the same things. So here is a 2019 story about the same thing. And here is a story about the most recent one from Wisconsin Public Radio, if you'll forgive me. Class action lawsuit calls out lack of state public defenders. Plaintiffs include 2 inmates who have been waiting months to be assigned attorneys. A class action lawsuit filed Tuesday is the latest step to reform an overwhelmed public defender system where some defendants in Wisconsin are waiting months in jail to see an attorney. The lawsuit claims there's a backlog of about 35,000 pending criminal cases across the state because of a shortage of public defenders. 8 plaintiffs from Wisconsin are named in the suit, all of whom have been waiting for an appointed attorney for several weeks or months. In Wisconsin, the public defender's office represents criminal defendants who meet income requirements and represents indigent minors in delinquency cases. The system is split between public defender staff attorneys employed by the state and private criminal defense attorneys who take public defender cases for an hourly fee. So that would be me. According to Wisconsin State Public Defender Kelly Thompson, about 17 to 20% of staff attorney jobs are currently unfilled. At the same time, there is a shortage of private attorneys willing to take public defender cases. So in one of the counties that I practice in, where I take a majority of my public defender cases, there are hundreds of clients. Well, not hundreds. At any given time, there's maybe 80 clients who are awaiting public defenders, and there are 2 or 3 attorneys, including me, who take private public defender cases, right? These clients who are waiting cases are waiting for they've conflicted out and they can't get a staff public defender appointment. They've conflicted out and they're waiting for a private bar attorney to come represent them. And so when this happened, I thought to myself, well, I need to take some of these cases for clients who have been waiting for months. And one of my clients has currently been waiting 4 months in jail, waiting for an attorney. And that is a violation of due process. Now, is it bad enough to get the charges dismissed or something like that? Probably not. Because what is the state going to do? I mean, look at this. This is the actual complaint. It was filed in Brown County, Wisconsin, which is a county that I don't practice in. But it makes a bunch of these allegations. So I'll just here's the foundation in law. The U.S. Constitution and the Wisconsin Constitution guarantee that people accused of crimes have the right to the assistance of an attorney for their defense. The U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that this right to counsel is a, quote, bedrock principle that constitutes the very foundation of our adversary system of criminal justice. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court has emphasized that, quote, the right to counsel in criminal proceedings is a fundamental constitutional right and a cornerstone of our justice system. Because lawyers in criminal courts are necessities, not luxuries, Wisconsin is required by law to provide an attorney to criminal defendants who cannot afford legal representation. The U.S. Constitution and Wisconsin Constitution require Wisconsin to appoint counsel to indigent defendants within a reasonable time after the defendant's initial appearance. Likewise, the Wisconsin legislature passed a set of laws that were supposed to provide for a prompt determination of indigency and appointment of a public defender. Prompt means without undue delay. Indeed, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has condemned delays in the appointment of counsel that take longer than 10 to 14 days, consistently finding such delays to be unreasonable. But Wisconsin consistently takes longer than 14 days to provide counsel to indigent criminal defendants. These delays have dire consequences. Defendant Kelly Thompson, the Wisconsin State Public Defender, recently acknowledged many indigent criminal defendants languish in jail waiting for legal representation. Quote, we have individuals sitting in custody waiting for their day in court. We have individuals whose family members are impacted because they're not home with their families. Defendant Thompson has conceded that the failure to provide timely legal representation, quote, is a statewide problem and admitted that it will take years to clear a backlog of roughly 35,000 cases. While this is a statewide problem impacting indigent defendants across Wisconsin, the problem is especially acute in Brown County, where the County Board of Supervisors had to pass a resolution in 2021 calling on the governor and legislature to take action to address a backlog of criminal cases because at the same time there were, quote, approximately 350 defendants in Brown County which currently need SPD representation, SPD, State Public Defender, 17 of which have been in custody and sought representation for over 100 days. Over 100 days. Given this constitutional crisis, plaintiffs requests that this court certify a class of current and future indigent defendants who have not received or do not receive appointed counsel within 14 days after their initial appearances, and enter one, an order requiring defendants to immediately appoint counsel for the class members, or two, if timely appointment of counsel is not feasible, dismissing the class members' cases with prejudice. Yes, that is an extreme, it's the appropriate, I think it's the appropriate resolution of the case. But that would mean dismissing all the criminal complaints against these people who are stuck in custody, who have been denied their right to counsel. It's just insane. So we'll go through, it's a lawsuit. So the complaint establishes the jurisdiction and venue, the parties to the action, the defendants, which is, of course, Tony Evers, the governor who locked down Wisconsin. He's a Democrat. Yep. Not gonna really go into that. You can watch my other, I think, what was it? I had an episode about, let's see, against the unconstitutional suspension of jury trials. Episode 133, libertyweekly.net/133. I went through this talking about Wisconsin indefinitely suspending jury trials. Tony Evers. All right, so general allegations. Wisconsin must appoint counsel on behalf of indigent defendants within a reasonable time after their initial appearances. So this would be the Sixth Amendment, providing that, quote, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Similarly, Article 1, Section 7 of the Wisconsin Constitution provides that, quote, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to be heard by himself and counsel. Right to counsel, quote, embodies a realistic recognition of the obvious truth that the average defendant does not have the professional legal skill to protect himself when brought before a tribunal with power to take his life or liberty. So, over 50 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court held that each state, or the United States Supreme Court, not the Wisconsin one, held that each state must provide a lawyer for defendants who are unable to afford one. So it just kind of goes through and details that, saying that under Wisconsin law, the defendants, like the governor in the legislature, are responsible for carrying out the state of Wisconsin's duty to appoint attorneys for qualified indigent defendants. So if you, they talk about for years, Wisconsin has systematically failed to provide indigent defendants with constitutionally adequate counsel. So, long been subject to unconstitutional delays, which may span many months before they have counsel. For many defendants, these delays are spent languishing in jail or in a legal limbo, during which their lives are affected and their cases remain on hold. This delay itself is a deprivation of counsel and constitutes a violation of the right to counsel. So I wonder how many of these, how many of the attorneys behind this case approved of indefinitely suspending jury trials? I wonder. Anyways, so here it is. I wasn't going to go into the numbers, but in 1995, the state of Wisconsin cut the pay for private attorneys, taking public defender cases from $50 per hour to $40 per hour. For the next 15 years, court-appointed attorneys in Wisconsin were paid only $40, the lowest rate in the country. This rate remained in effect until it was increased in 2020. In 2020, the rate was increased to $70 from $40. So not surprisingly, the number of private attorneys willing and able to accept these appointed cases has steadily decreased. For example, between 2012 and 2017, the number of private attorneys willing to take SPD appointments dropped by 16%. And over the last 2 years, the number of private attorneys has fallen by another 33%. Today, the process for finding a private attorney to represent an indigent defendant in Wisconsin has become absurd. One former assistant state public defender, Lee Suchert, has said that he knows of, quote, at least one defendant who went through 300 lawyers before one agreed to represent them. Similarly, Adrienne Moore, a regional attorney manager for the Racine Region Public Defender's Office, said that in 2018, it is not uncommon for our appointment secretaries to make 250 to 300 contacts on a complex felony. So what they did is they went through in this lawsuit and made an attachment to the lawsuit, which includes the current list of defendants who are sitting and waiting for an attorney to be appointed to represent them. And this is in a slew of counties in Wisconsin, some of which I practice in: Brown, Calumet, Florence, Fond du Lac, Forest, Green Lake, La Crosse, Langlade, Lincoln, Marathon, Milwaukee, Monroe, Oneida, Outagamie, Ozaki, Portage, Price, Racine, Sawyer, Shawano County, Sheboygan, Taylor, Trempealeau, Vilas, and Wapaka counties between June 3rd, 2022 and August 18th, 2022. As Exhibit A illustrates, there are at least hundreds, if not thousands, of people charged with criminal offenses in Wisconsin waiting for the assistance of an attorney. For many of these defendants, it will be months before they receive counsel. That's true. I get these emails with spreadsheets of people who are awaiting counsel. I get them every single day. And like I said, I mean, when this lawsuit was filed, I went through and I looked at some of the clients in one of the local SPD offices who have been waiting for an attorney the longest. And I took 5 or 6 of their cases because this is just absurd. And, you know, for all you fuckers out there who are saying that people like me, who are libertarians, who are just, you know, all we do is talk online and we don't do anything, or all we do is tweet about Yemen and we don't do shit to help Yemen, when, I mean, we've been writing articles for years about Yemen and talking about it and trying to make some action. I don't want to hear any of you fuckers calling me out, because this is a real problem and this is something you can that you can do. And this is something that I've tried to help with in my career. So I don't just sit behind a microphone and do these, you know, years of work. I'm actually out there in the trenches too. So, this is just infuriating. Sorry, it just pisses me off that there's thousands of defendants. I mean, look at the screen right now. Exhibit A. This is all of the clients that are awaiting appointment of counsel right now. I'm just scrolling through. You can see all these. This is not uncommon. This is, I'm still scrolling through. This lawsuit is 418 pages with attachments, and these are all the defendants that are sitting and waiting for counsel to be appointed right now. And I'm still scrolling. I press the mouse wheel and I'm increasing the speed with which we're scrolling through all the people who are awaiting appointment of counsel right now. So no, I don't just sit behind a keyboard and tweet about Yemen, or sit and do these podcasts or write articles that no one reads. So this is the other side of what I'm doing every day. But there isn't a whole lot of hope, because I've, you know, the scuttlebutt amongst some of the public defenders that I've spoken to, or the private pay public defenders, is that, and in some of the professional groups that I'm a part of, like WACDL, which is Wisconsin Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, have said that, well, even if we get what we want and we force the legislature to increase the pay rate for private bar public defenders, it's probably not going to make a difference. I mean, it's not going to fix the problem. It'll help a little bit, but it's not going to fix the problem. So the fundamental question remains, I mean, how long can we keep this up before something breaks and a system collapses? How long? I mean, what if this lawsuit is successful and the complaints for all these clients just get dismissed with prejudice? I mean, what if that happens? Maybe you collapsitarians out there would rejoice at that. I mean, you're letting out murderers probably. Well, I don't know how many people are charged with murder here, but you're probably letting out sexual assault, yeah. Sexual intercourse, child over 16, 2 counts. Like, let me go through all of the sex offenders, the alleged sex offenses that are in here. Violation of sex offender registry, 1st-degree sexual assault of a child under 13. Repeated sexual assault of a child, use computer to facilitate child sex crime. 1st-degree child sexual assault. 2nd-degree sexual assault, use of force, lifetime supervision of serious sex offenders. 2nd-degree, 3rd, 4th, and 2nd-degree sexual assault. 3rd, 4th, 2nd-degree sexual assault, another count. 3rd, 4th, and 2nd-degree sexual assault. There are 311 results. I just did a control F for sex to get sexual assault. There are 311 responses, and this is just a few Wisconsin counties. So, all right. Well, I think I've illustrated the whole issue here. I appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. I know I swore a lot more in this episode than I usually do, but this fires me up, and it's a real problem, and I think it's a real shame. I mean, these are people that are being held in our country where we can do something about it. That are being held, having their due process rights violated and deprived from them. And it's a problem that will continue in Wisconsin and will continue occurring across the United States for probably decades to come. And it needs to end. If a state is going to take on the responsibility of providing due process for its citizens, and if it's going to monopolize that process, well, it better do its goddamn job. And I know that's not the purest libertarian answer, but we live in a system where this is happening and where the government does have a monopoly on providing people with a suitable defense. So meanwhile, we have people who are focusing on what's happening in Xinjiang, China. And have they talked about this at all? I mean, these are people who are in jail without any kind of, there might be a probable cause finding for some of the misdemeanors, but there's no probable cause finding for people who are sitting waiting for their preliminary hearings in felony cases. And they're just rotting away in jail. Well, the rest of us have to pay for it, and the rest of us have to pay for their defense too. So, I'm not excusing what's happening or, what is happening in Xinjiang. I mean, there's people that are unjustly imprisoned in Xinjiang. I've covered that at length in this show here. But you have all these people in the United States who are worried about what's happening on the other side of the world and are bleeding hearts for those people, and would like the United States to step up a Cold War against another foreign country to advocate for those people. And try to, use interventionism to spread liberty and to liberate these people, where we can't do anything but make the thing worse. But meanwhile, we have people that are rotting away in prisons and while in jails across the United States, waiting for the appointment of counsel, and it's despicable. So, all right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I mean, we were talking a bit about some personal stuff that. I hope, a lot of you have been around for 5 years that I've been doing this show, and I really appreciate your support. I really value that you've been able to go on this journey with me, and we plan on continuing it for years to come. So if you want to help support what I do, head on over to libertyweekly.club. You can sign up for the free newsletter, but you can also sign up for the paid version where you get access to bonus content and early access to my articles and other things like that. Like I said, there's also a free version, which would be great if you signed up for too. libertyweekly.club. Check me out at the Libertarian Institute with my colleagues and friends over there, libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick for my stuff. And thanks to the new producer of the show, Mises Pieces, who has been the guy doing all of the overlays you see on the screen now and the artwork. And he is the producer now, and we're really excited to get working on some real like full-length scripted documentary content like the Corbett Report, and that is in the near future. There's a transcript that's all written out, ready to be recorded and produced with editing and fancy graphics by Mises Pieces. So look forward to that. If you want to support that, because it's my project, but I am bringing him on to do that. And if you want to support his work and really see a big step up in the quality of the content that you get here, like documentary content, like I said, Corbett Report in that style, if you would want to sign up for the newsletter, libertyweekly.club, that will help to make sure that it happens and that it continues to happen. So, all right, without further ado, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.